Hello class, this is your lecture on Kingdom Protista focusing on some algae groups. Let's get started. First we'll do an introduction to the algae, and then we will learn some of the recent classifications of different algae phyla, including the chlorophyta, the chromophyta, the rhodophyta, and we'll end with some words on human significance. First up, what constitutes Kingdom Protista? Well, this group is kind of an artificial classification at this time. We're still trying to sort out exactly what makes up the protist groups, and in the future, Kingdom Protista will probably be split into multiple kingdoms, but for now, we can just consider it a unit. Kingdom Protista has all members with eukaryotic cells, and their individual life cycles vary considerably. However, reproduction is generally by cell division, and in some cases there are sexual reproduction processes. Most members of Kingdom Protista are multicellular, and most of them produce a motile cell at some point in their life cycle. And that word motile means the cell is able to move or swim. So who belongs to the protist kingdom? Well, the algae is in there, and that includes photosynthetic single cells, colonies, and multicellular filaments. It also includes some fungus-like organisms, and it also includes single-celled heterotrophic organisms that resemble animals. So as you can see, it's a highly diverse and almost disjointed group of organisms. So to simplify Kingdom Protista as a definition, we can say what it's not. So Kingdom Protista includes eukaryotes that are not classified as green, land, non-vascular and vascular plants, aquatic non-vascular and vascular plants, the fungus, and the animals. As I mentioned, the Protista classification is a work in progress. Here is one phylogenetic tree that shows a proposed relationship for some of these groups, but please note that this is simply a draft and there is still a lot of work to be done. So what makes up this algae group? Well, the algae are defined as photosynthetic protists, and they typically have a flattened photosynthetic blade but no real leaves, stems, roots, or flowers. So while they might artificially look like plants, they do not belong to the plants. They do not have the same cells, nor do they have the same tissues. There are some accessory pigments found in algae, just like we found in the plants. Many of these pigments are water-soluble, meaning they are found in the cytoplasm. There are exceptions, though. Remember, many of the pigments are actually found on membranes, and those are not soluble in water. For example, chlorophylls are found on the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast. So examples include chlorophyll B, which gives organisms a green color. Carotenoids, they give organisms yellow or orange color. Xanthophylls give organisms a yellow or brown color, sometimes even a greenish color. And phycoerythrin and phycobilin gives the organism a red or blue color. Now, chlorophyll Bs are characteristic of the green algae phylum. Carotenoids and xanthophylls are characteristic of the brown algae phylum, and phycoerythrin and phycobilin are characteristic of the red algae phylum. Have you ever wondered why deep ocean water almost always looks such a deep blue color? Well, it's all about the wavelengths of light that are able to penetrate into the ocean. And short blue wavelengths penetrate the deepest into the ocean, where those wavelengths of light can be maximized by certain types of protists. One type of protist is phylum Chlorophyta. This is the green algae phylum. It includes the closest relatives to modern land plants. All of the phylum Chlorophyta contain chlorophyll A and B in their cells. They store their sugars as starch, and they have cellulose in their cell wall. You might be hearing this and thinking, wow, this is exactly what we see in plants, and that is true. These are not plants in the phylum Chlorophyta, but they share a lot of the same characteristics. Phylum Chlorophyta comes in several different forms. They can be single cells, filaments, or colonies. Most of them are found in freshwater or in marine ocean environments, but we can also find them growing on the sides of trees or rocks or even on the hair of animals. For example, the very famous slow-moving sloths actually have algae growing in their hair, which gives them a nice camouflage. Many members of phylum Chlorophyta are found in symbiotic relationships with other organisms, including in a symbiosis with things such as lichen or sea anemone. Our next phylum is the Chromophyta, and the language around this group changes quite often. So at this point in time when I'm lecturing on this, this is the name, but do know that the names change all the time. The Chromophyta is highly diverse, but it includes what we would consider to be the brown algae. The first type is the golden brown algae. These belong to the family Chrysophaceae, and you can see the spelling there on the screen. It's kind of a unique spelling. Remember, if you just pronounce a family name with authority, people will think you know what you're saying. The golden brown algae are usually mostly single-celled or colonial. They have the pigments chlorophyll A and chlorophyll C, as well as another pigment class called fucoxanthin. This combination is what gives them their brownish color. Most occur in the plankton of bodies of fresh water. So plankton means it's the floating organisms that are found inside that water. Our next member of this diverse phylum is the diatoms, and the diatoms contain pigments chlorophyll A and chlorophyll C, as well as the unique addition of silica in the cell wall. Silica is best known for giving organisms a glassy or sandpaper appearance. It's very rough. Silica is what is used to make glass. And so these organisms actually have an important economic use. They can be harvested and used for different types of activities that we'll talk about at the end of this lecture. Now, most of the diatoms are unicellular, and they are particularly abundant in cold marine habitats. When you're at the beach and you see a bunch of foam on the beach, you might have thought that was pollution, and sadly it might be, but more likely than that, it is dead diatoms. As those diatoms churn up in the waves, it actually releases the oils that are stored in their cell walls, thus producing that foam. Diatoms, as I mentioned, are abundant in the open water of the cold oceans, and there's so many of these things that they produce, by some accounts, up to 35% of our world's oxygen. Our next member of this diverse phylum Chromophyta is the true brown algae, which includes the giant kelp. Giant kelp belongs to the genus Fucus, and they are relatively large types of algae, especially compared to the others. Most of the brown algae are marine organisms that belong to this group, and all of them are multicellular. So there's no single-celled members of this family of brown algae. Many of them have a body plan that consists of a thallus that is differentiated into a holdfast, a stipe, and a blade. And the blades often have gas-filled bladders that help keep the photosynthetic parts buoyant in the ocean waters. Here we can see one of those giant kelp forests. For example, these are found in marine waters such as the Monterey Bay, just south of the San Francisco Bay Area. These body parts are referred to as the thallus, and the thallus is composed of a holdfast, which attaches to a rock, a stipe, which connects the holdfast to the blade, and the blade, which is where most of the photosynthesis and reproduction occurs. Our final phylum is the Rhodophyta, and this is the so-called red algae. What distinguishes this phylum is chlorophyll A and chlorophyll D, as well as the pigment group called the phycobilins. Most of the species of the phylum Rhodophyta are referred to as seaweed, and they tend to occur in warmer and deeper waters than the brown algae. Most of them are filamentous, so tightly packed together that it actually looks like a blade, but it's really just condensed filaments. And a few are crustose, appearing like a crust on the surface of rocks. They have a relatively complex life cycle involving 3 different types of thallus structures, and a number of species produce the economically important product called agar, which we'll talk about at the end of this lecture. Here are some examples of members of phylum Rhodophyta. One is the seaweed nori, which is used to make sushi rolls. And another one is called a coralline algae. This looks kind of like coral, but you might know coral is actually an animal. It's a symbiosis between an animal and an algae. But this coralline red algae does secrete a calcium carbonate substance in its cell walls and is a very important part of coral reef ecology. So now let's look at some of the products that are very significant to humans. First off, the diatoms. Remember, they belong to the brown algae group. They have lots of oils in their cell walls, and these oils are actually sources of vitamins. We can extract these vitamins and put them into commercial supplements. Another important product is called diatomaceous earth. This is scooped off of the bottom of the ocean, and because these organisms have silica in their cell walls, it gives it a very fine, gritty material. Diatomaceous earth is used for filtration, polishes, and even reflectorized paint. Next up is algin. This is derived from brown algae cell walls, particularly from giant kelp. We see this additive in things such as ice cream, salad dressing, and even things that aren't edible, things like paints and textiles and ceramics, as well as different types of waterproofing. The last one is agar, and agar is harvested from red algae cell walls, particularly from the genus of algae called Gelidium. We get this gel from this species, which is a solidifier of nutrient culture media for the growth of bacteria in the microbiology and cell biology labs. All right, well, there's our brief overview of the protists, focusing on a few groups of algae. Again, keep in mind that these phylum names often change, but we, for the purposes of this class, will go with the language that I have presented. As always, email me with any questions, and thank you for listening.